What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 meta decks for the competitive April 2021 format. We just recently had the March 2021 ban list a couple weeks ago, and it didn't really change a whole lot in terms of how the meta is looking, just because we've had a few weeks to kind of settle in. We had a couple of tournaments, both big and small, at least in terms of the online scope, but we're going to be bringing you data from both those tournaments as well as the online environment based off of data courtesy of YGeoScope to give you guys some insights as to what the best decks are. So if you're competing in any online tournaments, or maybe even locals, if your locals is reopening, you can know what to beat. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So kicking things off at number 5, we actually have a deck that I did not expect to be talking about in this video, but that deck is Prank Kids. Now, Prank Kids is a deck that's always been hovering in like the rogue category, maybe like tier 2 for a long time now. So now why all of a sudden is the deck cracking the top 5? Well, just so you guys know, for a little bit of insight, first of all, Prank Kids is like in the top 10 decks that are currently being played online, and the deck is actually boasting a 60% win rate. Now, to be fair, there's plenty of other decks which we're going to be discussing later on in the video that have either a slightly higher win rate or have many more games played, but it's pretty impressive that for how many games Prank Kids has played, it's actually still hovering in that 60 percentile win rate. Some of the top players in the game have been piloting Prank Kids at some of the higher tier online competitive events such as Pack and Hanko Chow, and have been seeing a relatively high amount of success with it, both in varying degrees of events. Yu-Gi-Oh! Extravaganza, it even performed well at the LCS and some of the other tournaments. You might have actually been seeing Prank Kids pop up a lot lately. Due to the most recent changes on the March 2021 ban list, this gave Prank Kids the opportunity to actually break away from the pack and actually enter that top 5 category, and this is for a multitude of reasons, right? I mean, the deck is just all one-card starters thanks to the Prank Kids Meow Meow. That Link 1 is amazing and allows the deck to just full combo off of a single Prank Kid, meaning the deck is actually very consistent. You also have the fact that its setups are pretty difficult to deal with as well. I mean, when you have a double Battle Butler activation, which means you can Regeki your opponent's board twice at any time, that's pretty good. Yes, there are cards in the game that either trigger in the graveyard or have some sort of immunity to destruction, but besides that, that's still very difficult for a lot of decks to recover from, especially if Prank Kids goes first and is unanswered. And yes, you could make the argument that Prank Kids is just a Nibiru magnet, but again, like a lot of other decks in the format, if you don't open the Nibiru, Prank Kids can actually have a very devastating setup, and it's difficult for you to play through regardless of whatever deck that you're playing. Another indicator of Prank Kids' success is actually the price at which the Prank Kids cards are now at. I remember Prank Kids was actually a deck that was on my top 5 competitive budget decks list for quite some time, which we will be doing tomorrow, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But now that Prank Kids has ascended to tier 1 contention, the cards have become much more expensive. I think Prank Kids Place, the field spell, is about $25 to $30 a copy now, and even Doodle Doo is like 15 to 20 bucks a copy, and you're gonna need almost full play sets of both of those if you want to play pure Prank Kid. It seems as though we just needed the right climate for Prank Kids to be able to prosper, and now that Prank Kids is here, it's looking like it's gonna be a strong top tier contender for at least the rest of this format. We obviously have Ghosts of the Past coming out soon, Ancient Guardians, we have several new sets on the horizon, especially before we get a new ban list anytime soon, so things can change, but for the time being, the way April's shaping up, Prank Kids is going to be one of the top decks that you're going to be seeing the most of, one of the most devastating decks you're going to face, and a deck that you definitely need to prepare for yourself. And so for those reasons, that's why I've got Prank Kids coming in at number 5. But coming in at number 4, this is a deck I didn't expect to have this low on the list, but there are some reasons for it, and that deck is Dinosaur. So Dinosaur is a bit of an enigma because this is one of the most played decks currently in the online environment, and this deck is just devastating, right? It has a very reasonable win rate at about 56%, so the deck's doing fantastic. So why do I have it so low on the list? I think there's one big reason for that, and that's just because everyone's really prepared to beat Dinosaur, and I think that really hinders Dinosaur's ability to do very well. What do I mean by this? Well, as soon as on the March 2021 ban list, True King of All Calamities got banned, this essentially opened the floodgates for Dinosaur to just come rushing back in and start taking over the format, right? Because Calamities was just hindering Dinosaur so heavily, it wasn't able to compete, but now that that's gone, Dinosaur can re-enter the format, and Dinosaur actually checks a lot of the top decks quite well. It's one of the strongest going second decks, if not the strongest going second deck in the format. It can completely break boards like no other deck can. So again, why is it so low on the list? As a result of the March 2021 ban list and the banning of True King of All Calamities, people were heavily anticipating that Dinosaur was going to re-enter the format, and I think they decided to prepare themselves appropriately. lately. If you see a lot of the top decks from some of the mid to larger tournaments in the online environment, a lot of these decks are actually side decking, if not main decking, 3 copies of Artifact Lancia. And Artifact Lancia just absolutely destroys Dinosaur. It is incredibly difficult for Dinosaur to function under Artifact Lancia because it shuts down your Miscellaneousaurus plays, it shuts down your double evolution pill plays. A lot of the big pushes that Dinosaur can make require you to banish some sort of cards that are in the deck, and so that means that the deck can fold to a card like Lancia rather easily. Artifact Lancia is also good against some of the other top decks in the format, which we're going to be discussing here in a moment, and so because of that, some players have been opting to main deck Artifact Lancia just to hedge their bets against those game 1 matches where they might come across Dinosaur, come across any other matches where it's good, and that actually is a very big problem for Dinosaur. To put it in perspective, if you don't believe me as to how much Lancia is being played at the moment, Artifact Lancia is the 12th most played card in the online environment as it currently stands, and this is up here with some of the most generic cards in the game like Ash Blossom and the Pots, and Lancia is at number 12. You know that that's got to be a very bad sign for a deck like Dinosaur. But regardless, Dinosaur is still able to persevere. You're seeing it's actually doing quite well at some of the more notable larger tournaments that are taking place online. It has some of the singularly most powerful standalone cards in the game that arguably could be on the ban list and have been and are on the ban list depending on if you're looking at older formats or if you're looking at the OCG. Oviraptor, Fossil Dig, Miscellaneousaurus, Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, all of these cards are incredible and they are all at 3, and it is very tempting to want to play a deck like Dinosaur when you're able to just completely overrun your opponent out of the game. So don't get me wrong, Dinosaur is still a fantastic option in this format, and if you love playing Dinosaur, you're gonna get your kick, but do be mindful that Artifact Lancia is everywhere, so you need to have a plan for that so that way you don't fold to it immediately, but that doesn't stop Dinosaur from being in the top 5, and it doesn't stop it from coming in at number 4. Now coming in at number 3, we have a deck that has been able to maintain its hold on the top 5 meta decks, and that deck is of course Invoked Shadal. Now obviously there's multiple variants of this deck, right? Because there's Dogmatica Shadal, Invoked Shadal, Dogmatica Invoked Shadal. I mean, there's just different hybrids of this deck all over. So whatever your taste may be when it comes to this selection of archetypes, they are all in the number 3 slot, because El Shadal Winda really puts a damper on the format, especially when you get to the number 2 and number 1 decks. It can actually be very difficult for a lot of decks to out a single copy of Winda, just because only allowing a player 1 special summon is devastating enough to win the game just by itself. But when you pair that alongside the Invoked and Dogmatica engines, these engines allow you to generate so much advantage that you're really playing this almost older style of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where you're really focused on just generating and keeping your resources and really getting as much value for your cards as possible, while then using the Shadal cards, which can also generate a ton of value thanks to Shadal Fusion working with extra deck monsters that your opponent controls, essentially being able to allow you to +2 off of a single fusion, which is just crazy, probably even more, let's be honest. And then by taking all of these engines and just smashing them together into one deck, you're able to just outgrind your opponent in a way that not a lot of decks are exactly able to do. I mean, let's go back and talk about some of the decks we already discussed, right? I mean, look at Prank Kids. If you're staring down a window and you're a Prank Kid player, you have very limited options to be able to actually start playing the game that aren't cards that are outside of your engine. Dinosaur is another example. Now, Dinosaur plays a lot of cards for going second and can actually break boards a lot easier, but even so, sometimes it can be difficult for Dinosaur to play through Winda if they don't have the correct pieces, and that can actually be a problem for them. So special summoning is the name of the game in Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, so anytime you have a card that's going to hinder your opponent from special summoning, especially in a high-tier, high-octane competitive metagame, then Winda is going to excel in this area. The deck is in the top 5 most played decks at the moment. It's boasting a 57% win rate, which is pretty fantastic, and I don't see this deck going anywhere anytime soon because people love their Alistairs, people love their Ecclesias, and people love their Shadals. You can expect to see a lot of this deck for the foreseeable future, and that's why I brought it in at the number 3 slot. But coming in at number 2, this was actually a tough one. Both of these decks have their pros and cons, and there's an argument for either one of these to be the number 1 deck. I think the number 1 outclasses it for a few reasons, and we'll discuss that in a moment, but for number 2, we have Eldritch. Now, Eldritch has just been everywhere, and there's so many different variants of this deck that have been doing quite well. I think Zodiac Eldritch is still going to be the most premier Eldritch deck you're going to see, and probably the one with the biggest target on its back. There are pure Eldritch decks that are opting to just play Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, because Dragoon can just win games by itself. Even Invoked Eldritch has made a bit of a comeback recently. In either one of the LCSs or a Yu-Gi-Oh! Extravaganza, it actually was able to make the top cut, and this is like a version of Eldritch we haven't really seen in quite some time, maybe since like the initial inception of Eldritch all the way since last year. But regardless, the Invoked Eldritch variant is still very strong. There's just like 7 other variants you can play as well, so I guess it's fun if you like a little bit of variety and you want to switch up the engines in your deck. Don't forget about Dogmatica in that case either, but I think Zodiac Eldritch, going back to this, is the premier version of the deck and probably the strongest and has the highest ceiling. Both the Zodiac and the Eldritch engines complement each other so well and are able to just take one another so far over the top. The Zodiac cards are good at applying a lot of pressure thanks to Divine Arsenal Zeus, and then you also have the Eldritch cards that are able to outgrind every other deck in the format because the Eldritch cards are so recursive and provide you a sort of invulnerability that no other deck really can. It truly is the deck that does not die. At times, there can be some consistency issues with the deck because if you don't see both halves of the deck, then it can actually fall apart rather quickly, and both individual halves of the deck have a much lower win rate than when both parts are together. I think the overall win rate for Zodiac Eldritch is about 58-ish%, and again, this is like the second or third most played deck at the moment, but when you actually look at just Zodiac or Eldritch individually, it actually falls down into the low 50 percentile, so you can actually just see by the math there how important it is to get both parts of your engine online, and it's going to actually really skew your probability of success in your favor. Just be mindful that there are several different Eldritch variants at play here, and when you're preparing your deck, whether it's your main or your side deck, I would say it's most important to focus on the Eldritch cards specifically, but be mindful of what is actually excelling in the Eldritch category at any given time, right? Right now, Zodiac Eldritch is the best, and to be fair, it has been the best for probably the last several formats, but who knows, at any point, maybe one of the other Eldritch variants will rise up. You have to be mindful of Dragoon, you have to be mindful of the different interactions that the different Eldritch variants can have, because that's going to help you understand the deck and help prepare to beat it if you do come across it. So for those reasons, that's why we gave Eldritch, and more specifically Zodiac Eldritch, my number 2 slot. But that's going to bring us to my number 1 meta deck of the April 2021 competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Format, and if you haven't already figured it out, I don't know where you've been the last several months, but that deck is Dragon Link. Dragon Link's also a bit interesting as well, because for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Extravaganza, which is probably one of the more notable events that we do have in the online environment, Dragon Link did not convert very well. I believe 5 different Eldritch variants did convert into the top 16, but only a single Dragon Link did. So why is that? Well, with Dragon Link being top dog, a lot of people are prepared to beat the deck because they know that that's the deck they're most likely to come across the most in any sort of tournament. I mean, when you look at the statistics, Dragon Link has the most representation of almost any deck online. It might be very close compared to Zodiac Eldritch or Dinosaur, but it's definitely in the top 3 for sure, so you can expect if you're queuing up online that Dragon Link is most likely what you're going to be playing against. Again, circling back to the March 2021 ban list, this actually affected Dragon Link's ability to perform to a slight degree. Although the deck didn't get hit itself, it actually allowed for other tools to be reintroduced into the game because of the banning of True King of All Calamities. Dark Ruler No More is actually a card that people can play again because the card was completely ineffective against Calamities, and so now that that's gone, Dark Ruler's back in the main deck. You see Dinosaur playing this in mass, you see people side decking it, and this is a card that can actually keep Dragon Link in check. Forbidden Droplet's a card that a lot of people were already on, but it still sees a ton of play today. People are even side decking Phantasme in some instances because Phantasme is a very strong card in the Dragon Link matchup because they go into so many link plays. It allows you to cycle through your hand, get a monster on the field, and can up your chances in that particular matchup. But with Dragon Link being one of the most played decks in the online format, it is boasting the highest win rate at 62%. So it's interesting that even though it didn't particularly convert in the higher tier tournaments, I think that's just because so many people knew that Dragon Link was the biggest threat, were preparing their decks, whether it's main or side, to be able to combat it, and that's why it actually hindered, and Eldritch was actually top dog in that top 16 as a result, because when people were preparing for Dragon Link, maybe they didn't focus on seeing as much Eldritch, and that's where it's fun to analyze where the metagame might progress. Dragon Link is still able to produce some of the most powerful and devastating boards in the entire format. Now that it's playing the Dragon Maid cards and the Dragon Maid Tidying Trap card, it's actually able to out stuff that it wasn't able to natively out in the more earlier iterations that weren't playing the Dragon Maid cards. Cards such as Mystic Mine, which is a staple in decks such as Dinosaur to win against combo matchups at times, Dragon Maid Tidying can take care of that card now, and allow Dragon Link to just push through and be able to continue winning the games left and right. Similar to a deck like Prank Kids or even Zodiac, Dragon Link is yet another deck that takes advantage of one-card starters and can really just get its combo going, which means the other 4 cards in its opening hand could just be all extenders that can play through cards such as hand traps or actual real traps, because real traps are still seeing a reasonable amount of play thanks to Eldritch and all these other decks being in the format. The format may not be as fast and rapid it has been in the past, but it's definitely faster than it was prior when True King of All Calamities was still around. And when Dragon Link can end on boards such as Hieratic Seal of Heavenly Spheres, we also have Borreload Savage Dragon, Dragon Maid Tiding, and even unknown disruptions in the hand in the form of hand traps, whether it's Ash Blossom, whether it's Nibiru, or the like. There are so many different reasons why Dragon Link, I feel personally, is the #1 deck of the format. But again, at the end of the day, the numbers don't lie. It's one of the most played decks. It has the highest win rate at 62%. You could argue that in the online environment, you're not always playing the best of the best, and that's why Dragon Link has been able to excel, but you have to realize that that's still going to be the baseline that people are going to take as to what decks are the best, what people are going to be anticipating they're playing against the most. It's a very adaptive format, and also not to mention, Ghosts from the Past is not far away at the time of recording this video. I believe it's less than 2 weeks away, and there's a lot of Dragoonity support in that set that could potentially up Dragon Link's ceiling even further beyond where it already is, and I already believe Dragon Link has the highest ceiling of any deck in the game, so we'll have to see what happens, but for the time being, the numbers are the numbers, and Dragon Link, in my opinion, is the #1 meta deck of April 2021. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you all so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon for exclusive early one-day access to both the Yu-Gi-Oh progression series and the history of Yu-Gi-Oh. Thank you all so much again, and we will see you next time.